Sometimes the loudest thing you'll ever say is your silence. Why do they always come back, my friends? Why does someone who once thought you were replaceable suddenly start looking over their shoulder, scrolling through old memories, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, they let go of the wrong person? It's not because they suddenly woke up and found a new level of loyalty. No, it's because fantasy never survives reality. That's the truth they didn't see coming. Before we dive deep into this, hit that like button, subscribe to Stoic Station, and lock in with me, because what I'm about to share will not only make sense of their return, it'll change the way you see yourself forever. Hey folks, imagine this. You've built a fire in the middle of the night. It glows, it warms, it lights up the darkness. Someone walks away from that fire because they think they found another flame somewhere else. But here's the problem with new fires. They burn bright, they spark fast, but many fizzle out just as quickly. And when the cold sets in, when the darkness starts pressing close again, guess what they remember? Not the flashy spark. They remember the steady flame they once walked away from. That's you, not loud, not desperate, not chasing, just steady, burning, rooted. They told themselves replacing you was healing. They told themselves that a new partner would erase the memory of your presence. But my friends, that's not healing, that's hiding. Seneca once wrote, "He who does not prevent a wound from festering is unwise." What do most people do after a breakup? They slap a bandage on a wound that needs real care. They distract themselves with noise, attention, and false excitement. But when the distraction fades, the wound remains. And you, your absence, becomes the mirror they can't avoid. You see, silence has a strange kind of power. It echoes. It's like walking into a room expecting chaos and finding stillness instead. That unsettles people. Most men chase after rejection. They text, they plead, they prove. But the rare ones vanish into discipline, into growth, into peace. And that silence, that calm, it's not weakness. It's strength they can feel even when you're not there. Let's have some fun here. Think about it. You've probably seen her post those smiling pictures, maybe with someone new, captioning it with something corny like "new beginnings" or "happier than ever." And part of you might chuckle because deep down you know it's performance, it's theater, it's like putting fresh paint on a crumbling wall. Looks great for the photo, but step inside and the cracks are still there. Folks, people can fake a smile, but they can't fake peace. And while they're performing happiness, you're practicing stillness. While they're chasing likes, you're chasing growth. Marcus Aurelius said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." That's why you win, my friends, because instead of performing, you're transforming. Instead of running, you're rebuilding. You're not the man begging to be chosen. You're the man remembering that you were never supposed to audition in the first place. And this is where it gets powerful, because when you stop needing them to see your worth, you finally start living in it. That's the moment they feel it the most. Not when you shout, not when you explain, but when you disappear into a silence they can't read. It's in that stillness they realize the truth. They didn't replace you. They just delayed the moment they'd have to face what they lost. So stay with me, because in today's video, you'll learn exactly why their new love won't last and why, sooner or later, they'll feel the weight of your absence. And when that moment comes, you'll already be too far ahead to need it. Write it in the comments. I rise in silence. Type it, show it, declare it. And while you're at it, press that like button and subscribe, because the stronger version of you is waiting, and I won't let you miss him. Number 1. Replacement isn't healing, it's running. You can change the partner, but if you don't change the self, you will always repeat the same story. My friends, let's start with the hard truth. They didn't move on because they healed. They moved on because they ran. There's a big difference between healing and hiding, between facing yourself and distracting yourself. Most people don't want to look in the mirror after a breakup because that reflection is raw. It shows them the flaws, the patterns, the wounds they haven't dealt with. And instead of sitting in that silence, instead of facing the discomfort, they jump into someone new. They convince themselves that replacing you is the same thing as replacing the pain. But tell me, can you really cover a deep wound with a bandage and expect it to disappear? Imagine this. A wall is cracking. Instead of fixing the foundation, they slap on a coat of paint. From a distance it looks fresh, it looks new, it looks whole. But underneath, the cracks are still spreading. That's what happens when someone runs from healing into another relationship. It's surface-level repair, not transformation. And the cracks, they always come back. They might be laughing louder now. They might be posting new pictures, showing off with that wide, staged smile. But ask yourself, what happens when the noise dies down? What happens when they're alone with themselves at night? When the filters fade? When the attention stops buzzing for a moment? Silence is a mirror, and silence doesn't lie. It shows them that no matter how far they run, the person they're avoiding is still there, waiting inside. Epictetus once said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And here's the reality. They didn't walk into freedom. They walked into avoidance. They're not free from their wounds. They're trapped in them. They're simply using someone new as a shield. But shields don't last forever. Eventually, reality breaks through, and the very things they tried to outrun show up in the new connection too. The same fears, the same jealousy, the same insecurities. Why? Because partners change, but the self doesn't, until you do the work. Now, I know what you might be thinking. If they ran into someone else, does that mean they're happier than they were with me? Does that mean I wasn't enough? That's the fear that creeps in, right? That quiet whisper that says maybe the replacement really did fix everything. But let's break that lie wide open. Happiness isn't found in swapping faces. Healing isn't found in jumping ship. If that were true, the world would be full of people who never carried heartbreak, who never repeated mistakes. But look around. Most people are carrying the weight of every failed connection because they never stopped long enough to face themselves. So no, they didn't replace you. They replaced the silence you left behind with noise. They replaced the discomfort of loss with distraction. And that distraction feels good for a while. Just like sugar feels good when you're hungry, even though it doesn't feed you. It's quick, it's easy, it gives them a rush. But when the rush is gone, the hunger remains. And worse, it grows. Here's the part they never admit, but always feel. The moment you chose not to chase, not to explain, not to cling, you handed them something far more powerful than drama. You handed them stillness. You pulled your energy out of the room, out of their orbit, out of their reach. And that silence, it doesn't scream, but it echoes. At first, they'll tell themselves it's fine. They'll say, "I'm happy now. I've moved on." But over time, the space you left grows louder. They expected you to linger, to wait, to orbit quietly in the background like most people do after rejection. But you didn't. You disappeared, not with bitterness, but with discipline. And that's the presence they can't escape. Think of it like this. Imagine walking into a room where music used to play. You expect it to still be there, even faintly in the background. But instead, there's nothing. Just quiet. At first, it feels strange. Then it feels empty. Then, eventually, you realize that silence has weight. That's what they feel now. The silence you gave them weighs more than any words you could have spoken. So why is this so difficult for them to face? Because healing requires stillness, and stillness requires honesty, and honesty means admitting the part they played in losing you. But that's exactly what they're not ready for. It's easier to run into someone else and say, "See, I'm fine now." It's harder to sit in the quiet and realize I'm not fine and I need to change. But here's the beauty of this for you. Their running doesn't weaken your value. In fact, it amplifies it, because the more they avoid, the more your absence stands out. They realize over time that the new person can't fill the same space, can't replace the same presence, can't silence the same echoes. You're not just gone, you're unreachable. And that unreachability haunts them more than your closeness ever could. My friends, don't fall for the lie that being replaced makes you less. Replacement isn't proof of your weakness, it's proof of their avoidance. And avoidance always catches up. When it does, when the mask of new love slips, when the distraction crumbles under the weight of reality, they'll feel it. Not just the loss of you, but the realization that they never dealt with themselves. And you? You'll already be miles ahead. Because while they were running from stillness, you were living in it. While they were performing happiness, you were practicing peace. While they were distracting themselves, you were rebuilding yourself. That's why they come back, not because you begged, not because you chased, but because your silence showed them what their noise could never give them. So write this in the comments right now. My silence is my power. Let it be your declaration, your shield, your reminder that you don't need to chase to matter. You don't need to prove to be unforgettable. Folks, stay with me, because this is just the beginning. We've only uncovered the first truth, and what comes next, it's even harder to deny. Number 2. Fantasy always crumbles under reality. Illusions may comfort you for a night, but only truth can stand the morning light. My friends, let's face it, when they step into something new, it often looks perfect from the outside. The smiles are bigger, the pictures brighter, the captions dripping with words like "new chapter" and "finally happy." And you might glance at those images and feel a sting in your chest, as if they've found something better, as if maybe you were the problem. But here's what you must remember. Fantasy photographs well, but it doesn't survive pressure. What they've stepped into isn't healing. It's a highlight reel. It's not truth. It's performance. Think about fireworks. They explode with brilliance. They light up the entire sky in flashes of color. For a moment, you can't look away. But then what happens? The sparks fade, the smoke lingers, and the sky returns to darkness. That's the nature of fantasy. It's loud at the start, intoxicating even, but it can't last. Reality is the steady flame that endures. And you, my friends, you were the steady flame. Not flashy, not staged, but real, grounding, solid. That's what stays imprinted in memory long after the fireworks die out. At first, they'll convince themselves that this new connection is everything they were missing. They'll say things like, "This is what love should feel like." But deep down, they're not seeing something new. They're chasing something familiar in a different form. They didn't evolve. They didn't sit with their fears, their insecurities, their habits. They just carried the same unhealed self into another relationship. And no matter how different the face beside them, the patterns always return. The jealousy shows up again. The arguments creep back in. The loneliness hides in the silence. Because here's the truth. You can swap the setting, but if the actor hasn't changed, the same play gets repeated. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But when they ran, they didn't change their mind, they just changed their stage. And sooner or later, the cracks start to show. The new person isn't you, They don't carry themselves the way you did. They don't respond with the same stillness when pressure hits. And in those moments, in the small details, comparisons creep in. Maybe it's the way they don't really listen when stress rises. Maybe it's how they fumble when silence falls heavy instead of holding it with calm. Little things, subtle things, but enough to trigger a thought they won't admit out loud. This doesn't feel the same. Now, here's where it gets interesting. While they're busy posting the fantasy, they're quietly wrestling with reality. Because no matter how hard they try to sell the picture, they can't sell it to themselves forever. The high fades, the gloss wears thin, and what they're left with is a mirror they've been avoiding. The realization that you weren't just a chapter they closed. You were a presence that doesn't disappear just because they changed the scenery. Let me give you another image. Imagine someone running on a treadmill with all their strength. From the outside, they look like they're moving fast, making progress, leaving something behind. But in reality, they're not moving at all. They're exhausting themselves, but they're stuck in place. That's what this new love often is. Running hard, burning energy, but not going anywhere new. Because they never stop to ask themselves, why do I keep repeating the same cycle? And when they eventually stumble, when the treadmill slows, they're forced to face the truth. And you, my friends, don't need to chase that truth for them. Life will do it. Time will do it. Reality will do it. Because reality always does. That's why you win. Not by fighting, not by proving, not by showing off that you've moved on harder or faster. You win by being still, by being grounded, by being real. Because reality doesn't need to be proven. It just is. So let them play pretend. Let them craft their fantasy. Because fantasy isn't your competition. Reality is your ally. And when the dust settles, when the glitter fades, when the performance finally collapses under its own weight, they'll feel it. They'll remember what steadiness felt like. They'll remember what peace sounded like. They'll remember what presence meant when it wasn't staged. And by then, my friends, you won't be waiting for that recognition. You'll already have stepped so far into your own growth, into your own peace, that their realization becomes just that, a realization. Nothing more, nothing less. So here's your affirmation. I choose reality over fantasy. Write it in the comments. Let the world see it. Let yourself declare it. Because that's what makes you different. You're not chasing the fireworks. You're becoming the steady flame. And stay with me, because next we're going even deeper into why their expectations about you were wrong, and how your silence shook them more than any words ever could. Number 3, they expected drama. You gave them discipline. Never waste your strength proving yourself to those who walked away. Your silence speaks louder than their expectations. My friends, this is the moment where everything shifts. When they walked away, they didn't just expect you to hurt. They expected you to perform that hurt. They thought your silence would last a few days at most, before the late-night texts, the emotional paragraphs, the please just hear me out moments started flooding in. Because that's what most people do after being left behind. They panic, they plead, they try to negotiate their worth back into the story. That's the script they had written for you in their head. They were ready for the drama, prepared for the storm, maybe even looking forward to it. Why? Because it would have meant they still mattered enough to shake you. But then something happened that they weren't ready for. Nothing. No message. No outburst. No chasing. Just silence. And not the silence that plays games, not the silence that says, I'll wait until they miss me. No, this was a different kind of silence. The kind that says, I know who I am, even without you. That unsettled them more than any explosion ever could, because when there is no performance, when there is no chasing, when there is no desperate attempt to be seen, it means you're standing on ground they can't shake. Think of it like this. Imagine a boxer stepping into the ring, ready to fight. They've trained, they've braced themselves for the punches, they're ready for the struggle. But when the bell rings, their opponent doesn't throw a single punch. Instead, the opponent steps back, lowers their hands, and walks out of the ring. No fight, no contest, no validation of the effort they put in. That's what you did. You refused to play the game they expected, and that quiet refusal is what hit them the hardest. You see, drama is fuel, conflict feeds ego. If you had chased, if you had argued, if you had begged, it would have given them a sense of control. It would have allowed them to believe, see, I still matter. I still hold the power. But when you replaced reaction with discipline, when you chose routine over recklessness, when you built instead of breaking, you took that fuel away. And without fuel, their fire started to flicker. Seneca once said, "Self-control is strength. Right thought is mastery. Calmness is power." That's exactly what you embodied when you didn't collapse. You recalibrated. You turned inward. You chose to structure your days, to discipline your mind, to build your body, to strengthen your spirit. And whether they admit it or not, that energy can be felt. The presence of a grounded person doesn't need to be advertised. It radiates quietly, like gravity. You can't see it, but you can't ignore it either. Now, let's be real. This isn't easy, because deep down, part of you wanted to react. You wanted to demand answers. You wanted to show them the pain they caused. That's the trap, believing that the louder you shout, the more they'll see your worth. But the truth, my friends, is the opposite. Worth never comes from performance. Worth comes from presence. And your discipline, the fact that you didn't fall apart publicly, proved something more powerful than any speech ever could. So why does this shake them so much? Because in their story, they thought you'd break without them. That's what most people expect when they leave, the collapse, the regret, the storm. But instead, what they saw was evolution. They thought your silence meant weakness, but over time they realized it meant strength. And that strength doesn't scream. It lingers, quiet, unshakable, unforgettable. Let me give you another metaphor. Think of a tree in a storm. The wind howls, the rain pounds, and yet the tree stands. It bends maybe, but it doesn't break. It stays rooted. Now imagine walking past that tree after the storm. What do you feel? Respect, admiration, maybe even envy. That's what your silence became, a rooted strength that demanded respect, even if they never said it out loud. And here's the part you need to hold on to. Your discipline isn't just about them, it's about you. Every time you chose not to react, every time you woke up and built instead of breaking, every time you stayed still instead of chasing, you weren't just proving something to them, you were proving something to yourself, that you don't need anyone else to define your worth, that your value isn't up for debate, that your peace isn't something you hand over in exchange for being noticed. So let them wonder why you didn't collapse. Let them replay in their mind the silence they weren't prepared for. Because while they're busy trying to make sense of your calm, you're busy becoming someone even stronger than before. Here's your affirmation for this section. I rise through discipline. Write it in the comments. Let it echo back to you. Let it show the world that you're not the man who collapses. You're the man who builds. And stay with me, because next we'll uncover something even deeper. The truth about why distraction isn't evolution, and why their running doesn't mean they've outgrown you. It means they haven't even faced themselves yet. Number 4. Distraction isn't evolution. You don't grow by replacing people, you grow by replacing patterns. My friends, here's a truth most won't admit. When they left you and jumped straight into someone new, it wasn't growth, it was distraction, And distraction is the enemy of evolution. They didn't move forward. They just moved quickly. They didn't outgrow you. They ran from themselves. And the thing about running is this: you can change the scenery, you can change the company, you can even change the bed you sleep in, but if you don't change the self, you always carry the same storm with you. Let's paint the picture. Imagine a person carrying a heavy backpack filled with stones, fears, insecurities, doubts, old wounds. Instead of putting the backpack down, opening it and taking out the weight piece by piece, they simply throw on a fresh jacket and tell themselves they look lighter. But the weight is still there. Every step is still heavy. That's what happens when someone uses a new relationship as an escape route. They cover the cracks with a smile. They mask the weight with excitement. But eventually, the stones rattle, the cracks show, the same heaviness resurfaces. Because nothing was actually healed, just hidden. Now let me ask you something. How many times have you caught yourself scrolling, seeing them with someone new and thought, maybe they've finally found peace, maybe they're actually happier without me? That fear creeps in, doesn't it? The idea that your silence was a mistake, that maybe you were the replaceable one. But here's the lie you must break right now. Distraction is not happiness. It's not evolution. It's not love. It's a temporary bandage on a wound they didn't want to face. Seneca wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." When they ran from you into someone new, that's exactly what they became, everywhere but nowhere. Busy but not grounded, smiling but not centered, posting but not peaceful, because distraction is movement without direction. And real growth, my friends, has nothing to do with how fast you run. It has everything to do with how deeply you root. Think about water. You can splash it, pour it, move it into different containers, but it doesn't change its essence. The only way water transforms is when it's forced to face fire and become steam, or ice and become solid. Pressure, stillness, heat, these things create change. Not pouring the same water into a different cup. That's what they did, poured themselves into another cup, hoping it would feel different. But inside, it's the same. And this is why your silence is so powerful. Because you didn't distract yourself. You didn't run into noise. You faced the void. You sat in the discomfort. You chose stillness over shortcuts. And in that stillness, you started to evolve. That's why they can't shake you from their mind. Because while they distracted themselves from the wound, you allowed yours to become wisdom. While they looked outward for validation, you looked inward for strength. That's the difference, that's the separation. But don't get it twisted. It's not easy for them to admit this, because if they do, they'd have to face the mirror of your absence. They'd have to say out loud, maybe I didn't move on. Maybe I just moved away from the truth. And most people aren't ready for that honesty. So they keep posting, keep performing, keep smiling through the noise. But deep down, when the night comes and the phone is quiet, that's when distraction loses its power. That's when the void you left shows up again, louder than ever. Here's what you need to remember. You weren't replaced. You became the mirror they avoid. You became the absence that reveals their avoidance. And the more they distract themselves, the louder that absence echoes. They might try to drown it in someone else's voice, someone else's presence, someone else's attention. But noise doesn't erase memory, it only delays it. And what they'll realize eventually is haunting. They didn't just lose you. They lost the version of themselves who felt safe, grounded, and seen with you. So don't confuse their distraction with evolution. Don't confuse their noise with peace. Don't confuse their movement with growth. Because while they're running in circles, you're walking forward. While they're performing happiness, you're practicing it. While they're avoiding themselves, you're mastering yourself. That's the real win. And here's the affirmation you need to write in the comments. I grow in stillness. Declare it. Show it to yourself. Let the world around you see it. Because stillness is where real power is built. Stillness is where transformation happens, and stillness is why, in the end, distraction will fade, but your presence will remain unforgettable. Stay with me, because in the next section we're going to break open another hard truth, the difference between performing happiness and actually living it. And that's where things get even more powerful. Number 5. While they perform happiness, you practice peace. Peace is not the absence of noise, it is the presence of discipline. My friends, let's strip away the illusion. What you see on their screen, what you hear in their words, is not the full story. Their smiles may look brighter, their nights out may look wilder, their captions may scream freedom, but deep down, it's performance. It's not peace, it's not evolution. It's not the kind of grounded stillness that transforms a life. It's theater. It's them trying to prove something, not to you, but to themselves. You've seen it, haven't you? The carefully posed photos, the exaggerated laughter, the overdone living my best life slogans. And for a moment, you might feel a sting in your chest, a whisper in your mind asking, what if they really are happier without me? What if I was holding them back? That's the lie they want the world and sometimes themselves to believe. But let me remind you, happiness doesn't need an audience. Peace doesn't need applause. And the louder someone tries to prove it, the less real it usually is. Think of a stage actor. They put on the costume, step into the lights, and perform their lines flawlessly. To the crowd, it looks real. But when the curtain falls and the makeup comes off, who are they then? That's the difference between performing happiness and practicing peace. One fades when the stage is empty, the other is steady no matter who's watching. And here's where you win, my friends. Because while they're exhausting themselves, trying to convince the world that they've moved on, you're not performing, you're practicing. You wake up earlier than you used to. You train harder, not to flex, but to discipline the part of you that once felt broken. You choose silence, not because you're hiding, but because it's in stillness that you've learned to rebuild. You don't need to be seen because you finally understand. Real peace doesn't shout, it breathes. Marcus Aurelius said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And that's what you've been cultivating. Thoughts that build you, not break you. Thoughts that anchor you, not scatter you. You stopped scrolling their life and started scripting your own. You stopped reacting to their noise and started responding to your own needs. Every decision, choosing the gym over gossip, choosing meditation over messaging, choosing breath over chaos, is another brick in the foundation of the man you're becoming. Meanwhile, look closer at them. Behind the filters, behind the constant activity, behind the curated freedom, there's tension, because performance always needs an audience. The moment the audience stops clapping, the performer feels the emptiness again, and the harder they perform, the more obvious it becomes that they're still running from themselves. Now, don't mistake this. This isn't about you versus them. This isn't about watching and waiting for them to crumble. This is about understanding the quiet power of peace. Because the man who practices peace doesn't just survive heartbreak, he transforms through it. He doesn't need validation. He doesn't need attention. He doesn't even need to be remembered. Why? Because his worth doesn't depend on being seen. His worth depends on being centered. Imagine a lake. On the surface, there may be ripples, noise, movement, but underneath, at its depth, the water is calm, unmoved, steady. That's you now. And when they look at your silence, when they see you no longer performing, it unsettles them, because deep down, they realize, while they've been chasing noise, You've been mastering stillness, and stillness lasts. Let me hit you with the truth that most men never realize. You don't need to show the world that you've moved on. You need to live like you've moved on. You don't need to prove your worth. You need to embody it. And once you do, no stage, no audience, no applause can compare. Because you don't play for the crowd anymore. You play for yourself. So while they perform happiness, you practice peace. And that peace, my friends, isn't fragile. It doesn't crack when they post. It doesn't shake when they smile. It doesn't break when they pretend. It stands. And the longer it stands, the more undeniable it becomes. Write this affirmation in the comments. My peace is my power. Type it. Declare it. Remind yourself and the world around you that you don't chase applause. You don't perform for attention. You don't need noise to feel alive. You are at peace. You are a presence. You are power. Stay with me, because what's coming next digs even deeper. The truth about detachment, and why the more you let go, the more doubt creeps into their mind. And that, my friends, is where your silence turns into something unforgettable. Number 6. The more you detach, the more they doubt. Detach not with anger, but with clarity, for nothing unsettles the unhealed more than your silence. My friends, here's where the story flips. At first, when you went quiet, when you didn't chase, when you didn't check in, they told themselves it was temporary. In their mind, you were just playing strong for a little while. They assumed eventually you'd circle back, like most people do. You'd like a post. You'd watch a story. You'd leave some tiny breadcrumb that proved you still cared. They thought your silence was strategy, not strength. But then the days turned into weeks, and the weeks stretched into distance that no longer felt like a performance. And that's when the doubt started creeping in. Not yours, theirs. Because silence has a way of revealing what's real. If you're only pretending, it cracks, it slips, it shows itself in little moments of weakness. But when silence holds steady, when it stretches without breaking, when it doesn't waver no matter how much time passes, it becomes undeniable. And suddenly they're forced to ask questions they weren't ready for. Did they really move on? Did they ever care as much as I thought? Did I matter at all? Think of it like a shadow. At first, they think it's still following them, even when the light shifts. But the longer they walk, the more they realize the shadow isn't there anymore. That's what your detachment feels like to them. They expected to still feel your presence in little ways. They expected you to orbit quietly, even if at a distance. But you didn't. You pulled your energy back completely. And that absence, it doesn't feel like emptiness. It feels like power. Now, let's break the lie that often creeps into your own mind. If I don't show them I care, they'll forget me. No, my friends, the truth is the opposite. The less you show, the more they wonder. The quieter you become, the louder their thoughts get. Because mystery always weighs heavier than clarity. When someone knows you're still watching, still waiting, still hoping, they feel secure. But when they can't read you, when they can't track your moves, when they can't find you anywhere in their orbit, that's when their security crumbles. Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Your detachment lives in that wisdom. You're not doing what isn't right. You're not chasing what walked away. You're not saying what isn't true. You're not performing feelings you've already released. And that authenticity, that calm refusal to play their game, leaves them with nothing to hold on to. No drama, no fight, no comfort of knowing you're still there in the background. And here's the paradox. They thought leaving gave them control. They thought silence would make you weaker, but the more you detached, the more control shifted. Suddenly, they're the ones checking your profile, not to see what you're doing, but to see if you're doing anything. They're the ones scrolling through old messages, not for answers, but to reconnect with the certainty they once felt when you were in their life. They're the ones replaying memories they swore they buried, all while you're not even looking their way. But don't misunderstand, this isn't about punishing them with absence. This isn't about making them feel doubt so you can feel power. This is about you realizing the deeper truth. Detachment isn't an act against them, it's an act for yourself. You let go not to hurt them, but to heal you. You didn't stop watching because you wanted them to chase. You stopped watching because you no longer needed to. That's the kind of freedom they can't understand yet. And that freedom is why your silence feels louder to them with each passing day. Imagine the ocean. When the tide pulls back, it leaves the shore exposed. At first, it feels like it will return any second, but then it doesn't. The sand grows dry, the shells appear, the absence of water becomes undeniable. That's your detachment. At first, they thought it was a wave, temporary and predictable, but as time stretched on, they realized it wasn't a wave. It was the tide itself pulling back for good. And that's when the fear begins to settle in, because now the story they told themselves when they walked away, the story where they were in control, where you were the one holding on, where you were the one waiting, is cracking. The longer you stay detached, the harder it is for them to cling to that illusion. And eventually, they have to face the truth that your silence isn't weakness. It's strength, it's self-respect, it's power. So here's your affirmation. Detachment is my freedom. Write it in the comments. Declare it not as a performance, but as a reminder that letting go isn't losing, it's winning. Because while they drown in doubt, you rise in clarity. And stay with me, my friends, because in the next section we'll uncover the twist most men never see coming. Why their return isn't about love at all, but about testing if the man you've become is truly as unshakable as you seem. Number 7. Their return won't mean what you think. Not every knock at the door deserves to be opened. My friends, here's the moment most men misunderstand. At some point, maybe weeks later, maybe months, maybe even years, they will return. And it won't always look like a grand confession or an emotional apology. Sometimes it will be small, subtle, casual, a simple hey dropped into your inbox at 1 a.m. Sometimes it'll be a memory they bring up, a song you once shared, or a photo they suddenly like after ignoring you for so long. And in that moment, your heart will beat a little faster, won't it? You'll feel that flicker of recognition, that old rush you once craved. But hear me clearly, their return does not mean what you think it does. They're not coming back because they've suddenly transformed. They're not reaching out because they've healed their wounds. Most of the time, they return for something far smaller, far simpler: control, curiosity, or validation. They want to know if the man who didn't chase, the man who stayed silent, the man who walked away with discipline, is still orbiting their world. They want to know if they can still reach you. They want to know if you'll still answer. And this is the trap, my friends. Many men confuse attention with love. They see a message and mistake it for meaning. They hear a voice and think it's a vow. But you must understand, this is not a second chance at love. This is not the universe sending them back to complete the story. This is a test of whether your silence was rooted in strength or whether it was just waiting in disguise. Think of it like this. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a cliff. For months, you've been climbing, step by step, building strength, learning to stand steady on your own. And then one day, someone calls your name from below, asking if you'll climb back down. Not because they want to climb with you, not because they've changed, but because they don't like the feeling of you being above them now. That's what their return often is. Not a true desire to rise with you, but an attempt to pull you back to where they last left you. And here's where most men fail. They mistake the knock at the door for a key to the future. They open it wide, they welcome back the same chaos, and they call it hope. But hope without wisdom is just another trap. And you, my friends, are no longer the man who falls for the same cycle twice. Marcus Aurelius said, "If it is not good, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Apply that wisdom here. Their return might feel good for a moment, but is it truly good? Their words might sound true in the heat of emotion, but are they truly true? If the answer is no, then why would you reopen the door you fought so hard to close? Here's the real victory. You don't need to meet their return with ego, bitterness, or pride. You don't need to prove you've moved on by flaunting your progress. You don't need to argue, explain, or perform. No, you meet their return with calm, with stillness, with the same unshakable energy that unsettled them in the first place, because nothing says growth like realizing you no longer need what once broke you. So if they come back, see it for what it is. Not love, but a mirror. A mirror reflecting the man you've become, the discipline you've built, the peace you now guard. And when they realize that the version of you who once needed them no longer exists, when they feel the weight of their irrelevance, that's when they'll understand the truth. You didn't just let go of them, you outgrew the need for them altogether. And now, my friends, it's your turn. Write this in the comments. I don't chase, I choose. Declare it boldly. Let it be the reminder that you're no longer waiting for doors to open, you're building new ones. If this message stirred something inside you, don't let it fade. Hit that like button, subscribe to Stoic Station, and share this with a brother who needs to hear it. Because the man you're becoming is not a dream. He's real, he's rising, and he will not go back to being the man who begged for what was already lost. Stay strong, stay silent, and stay walking forward. Your peace is the proof.